All right, we are back after an exciting break. We hope that all of our viewers, whether you're watching this live or in the future, hello, had a great end of 2023. Today, as you can see, I am joined by producer Ben. Tristan is still out. But I'll be covering most of the stories this week and providing my technical commentary and insight. But I'm actually impressed. Ben, you and I were having a little bit of a chat before the show, going over the material for this week, and you're going to make a great fill-in. I know you will. You have some good insight on the topics. How was your past couple of weeks during your holiday season?
It was good, saw family and did a little driving around, from place to place. How about yourself?
Wonderful. I had lots of family in town. Got to see many lights and entertain guests. Wonderful times all around. But with that in mind, that doesn't mean that the internet slowed down by any means.
Truly.
And so we want to welcome all of our viewers for GPS Live for the week of January 5th, 2024. I got to get used to saying that. It's going to take me a while, when you're writing the date.
It'll be June before I finally stick it.
I get it, and I completely agree. But before we start talking about our material for this week, we do have something that we need to say, that the views and opinions expressed by the host of this live stream are their own and do not necessarily reflect the official opinions of GuidePoint Security. Good. So now that that's out of the way, we do have a number of really exciting topics for this week. And Ben, you're really, I know you're gonna do great. You're gonna help me out with this one.
I've been told that if I mess this up, I get fired, so it's got to be good.
You'll be missed. So in the first story coming to us this week happens to be straight out of Europe. I know we try to sometimes take a look at it from an international perspective, but thanks to Tech Radar for hosting this story. Orange Spain. Now, for those that you aren't familiar, Orange is the second largest cellular carrier in Europe. There's Orange, Vodafone, all kinds of stuff like that, and then more regionalized carriers, similar to what we have here in the United States, like AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile. And so Orange, being, massive, they were offline for a little bit there, and it's what led up to this, right? Like, what was your quote that you called out earlier when we were reading over the story?
Oh goodness, the specifically about the password.
Yeah,
was ridiculously insecure,
ridiculously weak, right? And so this story goes into detail to explain something that kind of haunts all of us in a little bit of a sense, is that one, you may be dealing with a compromise, especially one that you're not aware of, but even more so, your credentials are being sold and traded on the dark web. And in this particular case, the administrator or an administrator of Orange, their credentials were harvested and then further sold through some dark web forums, and ultimately landed in the hands of some cyber criminals. Those cyber criminals took it upon themselves not necessarily to compromise Orange's internal network, but they took it a step further. And this is something that puts a little spin or twist on, everything that your company touches, right? This is like one of those Simba moments where you are responsible of all of the things that the sun touches, including your internet backbones, or for those in the industry, BGP routes. And so this particular nefarious actor went into their RIPE configuration. And for those that are playing along at home, particularly RIPE NCC, which is the Network Coordination Center, is one of the 5 regional internet registries responsible for managing and allocating IP addresses to ISPs like Orange. And so by accessing their network allocations I'm talking internet level, not like internal IPs, but like how IPs work across the internet, they started really messing things up, causing a number of different outages for users. But furthermore, they really started to dig into abusing some of the functionality of this internet level configuration. Now, obviously, for those that are much more savvy into how some of the real back-end internet stuff works, I implore you to read further into the article. You'll be able to find yourself, looking at things like ASNs, ROA records, and understanding, PKI. It's quite an interesting read, but there's a lesson to learn here, right? That I was saying is that this isn't just, hacking into a company. This was, hey, I'd like to buy something from XYZ company. So
it's also interesting. They still don't know why the person did this.
Okay.
Like, typically we have an understanding of there is sort of a financial motive behind attacks. In this particular instance, there, at least at this point, does not appear to be the case, right?
That's a really interesting perspective. It almost makes it feel like, sometimes an organization, they may say, well, that will never happen to me, right? Or I'm not big enough, or who would target me, right? And no particular, like you said, we'll say organization or larger cybercrime group has kind of stepped up and said, we did this, or give us money, right? Like this wasn't even a ransom scenario. This kind of so far appears to be purely of malicious intent, and it serves as kind of like a wake-up call to how not just credentials within your organization are handled, but the fact that there are resources outside of your purview, not just your Active Directory or single sign-on platform, but if you are at a level of ISP or some sense of owning your own, autonomous block, then you need to figure out how to make sure that those are equally safe and managed, right? When you buy a .com these days, you can't just log into the registrar and trade it off to another registrar. There's a series of protections to keep people from stealing .coms, for instance. And in this case, it's similar in nature, where somebody went in and kind of abused it. Now, did we confirm whether or not they are back? Right, it was a small outage. But it's pretty crazy to think of something on that scale. Imagine a communication outage here in the United States with any of the number of major carriers. This could be potentially mixed with any other type of large, potential attack or things along those lines, and just the disruption of communication in itself. Does tend to hold some major impacts. What was it? I was watching a movie the other day about hackers shutting down things. It's on Netflix. You can go look it up in between the new ads. So there's a level of impact that kind of gets scary sometimes when it comes to critical infrastructure, and communications, especially things like cell phones and internet backgrounds are indeed fall within that. To our next story, by the way, producer Ben, what is your Twitter password? Because I was thinking about taking it over just like somebody else here.
It's Jonathan Singer Rocks !1891.
All right. I like your password. Well, in that case, consider it breached, just like a very, almost famous in the security realm, Mandiant's own Twitter account. And for those that play along at home, Mandiant is now part of Google in a sense. Their own Twitter was taken over for a period of time that's about 6 hours, they say. But of course, our good old friend crypto scams are back. And so it was used to push crypto scams. And sadly, about $125,000 were found to be have transacted as part of this. But I highlighted this not to necessarily speak poorly of any particular business or company in that nature, but what I wanted to do is I wanted to again harp on this entire concept of cybersecurity, of the things that are out of your control. And you know, to me, it's things like social media and its brand. And that's a big area these days, especially when it comes to maybe like a publicly traded business where affecting a stock is a potential motive of these types of attacks. Or there's other cases where, you know, like in this case, stealing money via crypto scams, directly impersonating or attacking individuals. Or we've even seen this historically from a political standpoint, where a number of different politicians have had their social media accounts taken over and a particular agenda posted and shared on their profiles. And so this one, a little bit interesting, but it just goes to show that even high-profile companies like Google can have their social media accounts compromised through a number of different ways. There are underground markets, just like we saw with the Orange credentials. There are underground markets for social media accounts, especially if they are considered high-profile or could potentially swing an opinion in a direction. You know, Ben, I don't think, you know, have you ever experienced any kind of like a social media hijack of your own?
Well, I mean, you know, back in high school, like everyone else, you know, friends left their Facebook open. I would hijack their Facebook. So, you know, I guess sort of a form of social engineering of sorts.
Yeah. Well, you know, we would never admit that live on the air, but
I mean,
conceptually,
allegedly, I
allegedly.
would, you
Um,
know,
but
trust.
but no, you know what you're saying is that you know, individuals may assume some level of trust,
Yeah.
or may unknowingly understand the impact of their decisions, and therefore lead to a compromise of something either personal to them or the business that they work for. And so having, you know, we've talked about on the show, right? Passwords are great, but multi-factor is even better. But we've seen a number of different challenges in multi-factor in itself, right? Between text message interception with SIM swapping, to now even potentially one-time password, different types of techniques of social engineering and intercepting communications to steal those kinds of things. It's really becoming more and more challenging. You know, we actually have a great comment here. I'll go ahead and post this on here. But Juan, you're absolutely right. Enforcing multi-factor authentication on social media accounts is pretty much a must these days. If you are not actively enforcing multi-factor authentication, in my opinion, on everything, then you are leaving the door wide open for your employees to potentially exercise password reuse, where if their credentials are breached somewhere else on the internet, they could be reusing it. But it also opens up the door to password spraying attacks and a number of different other techniques that target basic password authentication. So multi-factor is the way to go. Again, for those playing along at home, right? It's something you have, something you are, something you know. Pick 2 out of 3 at least, and kind of consider it a win from there. And by the way, we love this kind of interaction from our viewers. So if you have ever had your social media account hijacked and it was because you were lacking multi-factor authentication, please let us know what you did about it. Did you get multi-factor authentication enabled? Did you even get your account back? I do get a regular phone call from friends about getting their Facebook accounts hijacked, and it's kind of difficult to get your way back in, but eventually we do get that back up and running so that they can continue to interact with family and friends. But again, the big lesson there I learned is there are certain things that are within your control, right? Ben, what name a security tool within a company that is within a CISO's control?
Within the CISO's control?
Firewall. What else?
Oh goodness, are we not counting MFA in this moment?
MFA, that's a good one.
I mean,
antivirus or EDR, you know, right? The concept is we have tools, we have things that are within the enterprise that we control, we maintain, we manage. But you know, the sale of credentials on dark web, you know, our brand and recognition socially, you know, from a public perspective, PR, things of that nature that can, you know, negatively impact our business. Sometimes that's out of our control and we need to keep an eye on it. And that's going to be one of the trickier components. I personally think it's a little bit weird. that somebody at Google didn't pick up the red phone, or in this case, the blue phone, and call Twitter and be like, hey, I don't know. I just assume everybody in San Francisco has everybody's numbers at that level, and they can, fix things quickly. Hey, Elon Musk, post your digits. But yeah, another great one, right, Hassan? It's a fantastic concept of having PAM, right? Privilege access management, making sure that there's a separation of the concept of users, and then there's privilege, and how do we manage that privilege? How do we manage those credentials, and how do we potentially even monitor and secure those communications of those privileged users so that we can identify, playback, and make sure that something less impactful doesn't necessarily take our business down, or at least our social media.
It's not one of those things that feels potentially as destructive, because if you hack a social media account, you're not going to be able to necessarily list out customers or personnel information, but damage to your brand reputation is in some ways just as bad, right? You lose credibility, you lose trust. It can take years, decades to recover from something like that, just on the basis that people now perceive you in a very different light. Like, oh, well, if you hack your social media account, what else can they do?
You are correct. And that's just from a business perspective. What if you're a high profile individual, like a celebrity? Well, what about all of those people that slide into your DMs? We've seen those kinds of challenges arise too, where confidential conversations have become public view on things like Instagram because those individuals' accounts were compromised. And so you're absolutely right. There's a lot of different directions that these kinds of things can come in that don't necessarily align with conventional cybersecurity standards or practices or consequences even, right? Yeah, so it's not your Active Directory, but there's still an impact at the end of the day. I love that take. Were you gonna say something?
I was gonna say, don't undervalue sort of the extraneous pieces that are not directly tied to the sensitive data.
You're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct. So that is going to help kind of lead us into an upcoming story here next. And this one, it takes me back to my data center days of speaking raw protocols over Netcat. And so this story is coming to us from the Hacker News. But prior to this, part of my research for this particular story is I watched the actual talk that was given at the Chaos conference, and I was really impressed with what's happening here. And so it comes in as called SMTP smuggling, a new flaw that lets attackers bypass security and spoof emails. And so as far as email security, modern email security comes in a number of different ways, but there's three major ones that people consider from especially a DNS perspective, which is SPF records, Center Policy Framework, DKIM and domain keys, and stuff like DMARC. And what essentially is going on here is email nowadays, you can't just write an email from anybody on the internet. You have to be an authorized sender, and that's part of the fun of this is how do you become an authorized sender? Well, you have to prove it. And so SMTP smuggling is a clever new technique. And I love the visualization from the article, but imagine with me here, I was explaining, kind of looking at this earlier. At a very low level, when computers send emails to each other, they're speaking a protocol called SMTP, Simple Mail Transfer Protocol. And what's happening is there's a number of components here. For instance, we're going to play a game then. Ready? I'm going to tell you what to say. So this is how this works. So I am a new person, and you are a mail server. So I'm going to connect to you, and I say, hello. That's it. Thank you. You acknowledge me. And then I'm going to say mail from, and you're going to say, okay.
Mail from.
And I'm going to say recipient to. You're going to say
recipient to.
And then I'm going to say data. And you're going to say
data.
No, you're going to say write your email and end it with a period. And that's pretty much the story of an email, really, at the end of the day. What's happening here is this particular researcher found that you can craft multiple email headers that mail from recipient to, and you can kind of chain multiple emails in one single message. And for those that play along at home and are really well versed in the SMTP protocol, go port 25. You start to see here that when you write an email and you end your content with a dot, the email server says, great, you're done writing your email. I'll go ahead and handle and post this off for you. Now, what's happening is it's kind of smuggling a second email into the body, and the authority that is supposed to be essentially handling this is saying, this is one big email. And then the email server that's receiving it is going, well, there's a breaking point, that dot here in the middle. So this is one email and a second email. And it's chaining the second one right on through. What's interesting here is the first header is usually authenticated against. You're saying, hey, I am who I say I am, therefore you should be able to send this. The second email is kind of coming in right after it, and it's taking advantage of the fact that you can also say you're somebody else who is also authorized to send from the same server. The bigger picture here is a number of large carriers, including stuff like 365, for instance, was directly affected by this type of email SMTP smuggling attack. And if you can think about the scale of the number of customers that use 365, a clever attacker can craft a SMTP body and send on behalf of any 365 customer, including Microsoft themselves. That's what's happening here, is that they are taking advantage of the fact that you have a first authentic email and the fact that the backend server locates a breaking point and begins writing a second email using the first email's kind of beginning process. Definitely be sure to check out the article from the Hacker News. We will share out all the links as we usually do. And also check out the talk on YouTube. It is very cool. It recently dropped. 365 has already put a fix in for this. But all right, I'm going to do it. Mike, LO to you too. And that's EHLO for those that speak SMTP. And there are a number of other larger vendors out there that are calling this a feature, not a bug. And so there is a published list of things that you need to pay attention to. If you're also an active user of some of the open source projects like Postfix, XM, and a couple others, please be sure to update your applications as soon as possible to help prevent people taking advantage of this SMTP smuggling bug. It's a very old protocol. I mean, we're talking since the early times. And Ben, we were talking before the show, and I wanted to harp on how this is kind of happening at a technical level. Mm-hmm. And we were talking about the concept of ASCII control characters like return carriage or carriage return and new line, right? And it's kind of the concept of it all goes back to the typewriter, right? And so when an email is concluded, right, with a period, it does a carriage return new line, which is what happens when you press the enter key on your keyboard, and then a dot, and then a carriage return and new line. Remember, carriage return takes you back to the first character, new line drops it down. Well, if you separate those, you can bypass these checks. And so that's kind of what's happening here. Again, if you get deep into the SMTP protocol, I highly encourage it, but know that there is active phishing techniques taking place due to the disclosure of this vulnerability. And you literally just can't trust email anymore. Ben, don't send me an email. I know it's not.
I wasn't planning on it.
Okay.
Yeah.
You better.
Deal.
Okay. Now I need an email from you.
Draft that right
If you love spoofing email as much as I do, please drop a comment below. Our final story coming into us this week is kind of a little bit of a sad story. I know we usually try to end on a high note, but this is coming to us from Bleeping Computer, and it's titled "Online Museum Collections Down After Cyber Attack on Service Providers." These criminals have no boundaries. I can't.
What won't they touch?
What won't? I don't know. It's awful.
Yeah.
And so a number of very large art museums have their online gallery is currently offline, sadly, due to their application providers receiving a ransomware attack. And it's just really awful to kind of hear this. Because there was a big push for this a couple years ago, where when we couldn't visit museums in person, the effort to digitalize art and put it online and make it kind of available to viewers to still appreciate the finer things in life, like the arts, and so this is just one of those really sad kind of perspectives of somebody affecting the culture of a society through ransomware and directly preventing the gallery software from working, right? And so if you planned on visiting the e-gallery or e-museum of places like New York's Museum of Modern Art, Metropolitan Museum of Art, or even the Museum of Pop Culture in Seattle, I'm sad to say that those online systems are currently offline due to ransomware. It's really disappointing, and we hope that they can recover and get that material and content back online for their guests and viewers immediately. But yeah, we were off for a couple weeks. We are back. We will continue to bring exciting new content every week here on GPS Live. With that, we're starting to come up on the top of the hour. Ben, yes. Truly a pleasure. I'm really glad that we were able to have you on the show today. You provided some wonderful commentary and insight, and your opinions do matter. And so do those of our viewers. Remember, we love your comments. We love the interaction. Happy New Year to everybody out there that celebrates on the current Gregorian calendar year. And you know where to find us. It is every week on Fridays at 1:30 Eastern, 10:30 a.m. Pacific. But with that in mind, this has been and will continue to be the week of January 5th, 2024 here at GPS Live. I am Jonathan Singer.
I'm producer Ben. No last name.
I know. And with that, we hope you enjoyed, and we will see you next week. Take care.
Adios.